It's March 2012 and this patrol of US Navy and National Guardsmen in Uruzgan, Afghanistan is heading back to base. The man in blue is AusAid official David Savage.
It was getting quite warm and it was what they call the start of the fighting season, which is the time when the Taliban and insurgents became very active.
In 2012, David Savage had 3 decades' experience as a federal police detective and United Nations war crimes investigator behind him. Leaving the district governor's compound, they begin a 700-metre walk to the patrol base where they live.
You got Dave, right?
Roger. Yeah, we're gonna go through the bazaar, through the market.
This footage is taken from the helmet cam of a US Navy sergeant.
Oh, that's horrible. That's a big bruise.
My security had been outsourced from the Australian Defence Force to the US, and I had American National Guard as my security attachment, so they're part-time soldiers. Really, really lovely guys, but it was pretty common knowledge by the Australians that they were pretty poorly trained, not very experienced.
Hey, 37, you got a guy coming your way with these orange hands.
The US sergeant notices a man with stained hands. He asks soldiers ahead of him to check him out. They don't.
No, I was just letting him know that he's got a guy coming by with orange hands. Stained hands are usually a sign of HME production.
HME means homemade explosives.
Dave got a lot of tools here, nobody working.
Tools, probably the most valuable thing some Afghans own, have been left behind by a group of labourers in their haste to leave their worksite. But the patrol continues on. The US sergeant is now at least 20 metres away from Savage, who he's meant to be guarding.
Suddenly, everything goes quiet. I felt like I didn't really know where to go because the 2 people who were supposed to be my security were gone. So I was sort of wandering and there was no one close by me.
The Navy sergeant notices a child in pristine white robes. It's later established he's aged about 12. David Savage was walking next to a US soldier.
He turned to face me, whether it's to say something or whether he sensed something. And he looked at me, and all I can say is a face of sheer horror.
Oh, shit, son. God.
I heard the blast, and I felt myself going through the air, and then the next thing I woke up and I was laying on my back.
Get some cover, motherfucker!
Also with David Savage that day was Afghan interpreter Yonis.
I think he was the closest person to the bomber. That's why he got badly injured.
Hey! Give me some security around here!
At first I actually thought that I was dead. I couldn't hear anything and I wasn't in any pain whatsoever. And I thought, oh well, I've died and this is what it's like.
Give me that f***ing tourniquet up here!
I saw one of the guy treating David. He called get me a tourniquet. So I had one in my pocket shoulder. So I help him tie up David's legs.
Give me a pair of scissors.
Shit.
Give me some fucking saw gunner up there!
What's happened?
Give me a fucking saw up there!
Lean your head back. Lean your head back. Let me get these scissors out.
Give me a pair of scissors.
I can't get them out.
2 leg injuries.
Savage was hit by 64 ball bearings and pieces of shrapnel. One piece stopped 2 millimetres from his heart. His legs were shattered, his lungs had collapsed, and he had a traumatic brain injury. He's evacuated for life-saving surgeries. Months later, an Australian surgeon describes his wounds to him.
He said it was the equivalent of being shot 8 times with a shotgun. And he said, and no one survives that.
He did survive, though now he's in a wheelchair.
But the real struggle for David Savage over the last 7.5 years has been his ongoing fight to highlight what he says are a series of failures and outright lies by the organisation that had overall responsibility for him in 2012, the Australian Defence Force.
It's just been a physical and a mental battle for 7.5 years, which is, I guess, consumed me, my wife and our children as well. So it's been pretty tough.
Right one through. Good. And now left.
There's been no normal living, and coupled with having to fight defence in relation to their investigation.
3 weeks after the incident, Defence created an inquiry to establish if the attack could have been avoided and whether it highlighted systemic weaknesses.
I've got no doubt that probably at least equal to the physical injuries and PTSD has been the way that Defence has conducted themselves.
The inquiry focused blame on David Savage. It criticised him for wearing non-standard issue body armour and for being overweight.
They clearly had an outcome of their inquiry that they wanted to achieve, which was that there was no blame for Defence in this, and they constructed the investigation to ensure that outcome.
The report went on to praise the US soldiers, saying the attack occurred without warning. After someone anonymously sent David Savage a copy of the helmet cam footage, he became convinced that it revealed a series of failures.
When I watched the video, it showed a whole pile of really strong signs that we were about to be attacked. That it was pretty clear that even though that they were so obvious, that the Americans didn't realise.
The officer conducting the inquiry knew about the helmet vision, but made scant mention of it.
Incensed by what he saw as the report's failings, David Savage asked a respected former SAS soldier to review the inquiry and the helmet camera footage. The soldier found that the US patrol's tactics were poor and they'd ignored repeated warnings prior to the attack.
The original Defence report said there was no intelligence that suicide bombers were targeting the Chora Valley. That's not the recollection of Chris Thompson-Lang, who in early 2012 was leading a group of IED detecting soldiers there.
We'd had multiple reports of suicide bombers being trained, and there was reports of 2 12-year-old children being prepared for Chora.
The last intelligence report he recalls reading was in January, only 2 months before David Savage was hit.
I thought that it was highly likely that the child that blew David up was one of the 2 that had been reported while I was there, and one of the 2 that we'd been looking for.
David Savage has spent 7 years trying to force Defence to acknowledge errors in the lead-up to his attack. He says it's not about compensation or his grievance, but about outrage about the misuse of a system that is meant to learn from mistakes and, in doing so, protect lives.
They make out that you're just some bitter nut job that's got injured in a war zone and now is complaining about it. You know, I went there knowing that there was a possibility that I could get wounded, but never in my wildest dreams would I think that my own country would damage me even further by covering up what had occurred and preventing the truth from coming out.
In a statement, the Defence Department says the inquiry found that the US soldiers' actions were competent, diligent and thorough, and there were no shortfalls in their tactics or procedures. You can see the full response on our website. Hi, I'm Lee Sales. Thanks for watching this story. If you'd like to watch more of 730's stories, they are on the left of your screen. And tap on the button below to subscribe and get the latest from ABC News.